Senator Fawcett.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. Look, I'd like to rise to address this motion in three areas. One, to just rebut some of the political points that have been made by the speakers opposite. Second, to talk about some of the areas of shipbuilding where this coalition government is already taking steps to put shipbuilding onto a sustainable footing. And then thirdly, talk about some areas in terms of defence reform that we need to be looking at to make sure that defence industry is on a sustainable footing into the future. Firstly, to the political points. We've just had a speech there from Senator Gallagher where one of his main points was that Australian industry didn't get a chance to tender. Well, can I take him back to JP 2048, Phase 3 of the Amphibious Watercraft Program, which was the only naval construction program for ships that the Labor government under Prime Ministers Rudd and Gillard approved, and that was sent to Spain. I deliberately asked in the last estimates whether ASC and others had the opportunity to be consulted, to talk about it, to put a bid in. And Senator Gallagher's walking out here, he doesn't want to hear this, but what was confirmed by ASC was that they had no chance. That work was not tendered in Australia. The ALP sent that work to Spain as opposed to allowing Australian industry to pick that up. The other side that the ALP don't like to recognise is that when we realised a new icebreaker was required, they led a tender, and in this case they put an RFT out, and it was including Australian industry. And two companies came back and they said, yes, we could build the ship, but it would be built overseas. And the Labor Party never even got round to funding it, but nor did they require that that ship was going to be built here in Australia. So my rebuttal of the key argument around the fact that we haven't allowed Australian companies to tender is just not supported by the ALP's own actions when they were in government. The other key argument, and I hear Senator Xenophon's view around the valley of death and the impact on my own state of South Australia, and I, like other senators here from all sides, am a passionate advocate of seeing good, high-skilled jobs retained in South Australia in manufacturing as well as other areas. Again, in estimates, I asked the head of ASC about the timeline for the project of Air Warfare Destroyer and looked at the peak of the workforce, which is on us now, almost past it, and asked about the decision points that led to that. 2005 was when the Howard government chose ASC to be the builder of the Air Warfare Destroyer. 2007 was when the Vanty was chosen to actually be the designer of the ship. We're now in 2014. So that means that if we're concerned about a valley of death in 2016-17, then decisions had to be made years ago, not months ago. And that is one of the key flaws in the argument from the opposition on this, and both speakers today have talked about the fact that the coalition has now been in government for 9 months. Why isn't there follow-on work? It's because the time required from decision and commitment to funding to actually having people cutting metal and building ships is measured in years. If you take the Air Warfare Destroyer as an example, that is between 5 to 7 years. Now, why has the government taken the decision that the best way to get Australia onto a sustainable footing for shipbuilding is to look at the Future Frigate program? Well, it goes to the issue of productivity, and unlike the comments from Senator Gallagher, the criticism is not of the workforce, it's of the enterprise as a whole. And whether you look at the UK, the US or Australia, even the ANZAC program, which was correctly mentioned before, was a very successful program in Australia. The first ship was horrendously expensive. It happens in the US, it happens in the UK, it happens here. Over time, with enough ships in the fleet, you bring that cost down, which is why DMO, when they put together the Air Warfare program, Air Warfare Destroyer program, set a target of 80 man-hours per tonne, which is still 20 above world's best practice, but that was the target they set for the program, because they realised it would take some time to bring that down. Now, the issue with short builds, just one-off ships or maybe two, is you don't actually get the chance with a new design to bring that down. Now, with Anzac we did. Over time we brought that down, and Anzac were being produced at a productivity that was better than world's best practice, better than benchmarks. That's where we can also end up with the air warfare destroyer. And what the government has done by bringing the $78 million forward for engineering and design work is allowing us to look at the option to take the Navantia hull, which is used for the air warfare destroyer, originally designed for a vessel to be a sub-hunter, and once that design work is done, to look at the integration of an Australian system, the CFAR CEA radar, look at the options for integrating Australian design and supported ship control systems like those produced by Saab in South Australia, then you can start bringing forward the manufacture of hull blocks, because it is the same design of hull as the platform, which means that we can continue to draw value from the investment we have made in both infrastructure and, more importantly, in the skills of the workforce, not only those on the production line but those in the design area. And by building on that air warfare destroyer program for future frigate, what we see is that over time we will drive that productivity right down, and like the Anzac class, to the world's best practice benchmarks. That is how we actually put Australian shipbuilding onto a sustainable footing. Setting people up to fail and costing the taxpayer a mozza in the meantime is not a way to gain the confidence of the public, the media or the parliament around shipbuilding in Australia. How we move forward for defence as a whole, I believe, fundamentally comes back to rethinking how we look at defence industry. For far too many years across both sides of politics, defence industry policy has sat separate to defence's capability planning. Defence, in their capability development manual, their procurement approach, look at what they call the fundamental inputs to capability, the people, the organisational structures, the training, the equipment, the doctrine that's required. Well, one of those fundamental inputs is industry. And the way that we will put defence industry onto a sustainable footing is not seeing it as a job creation place, not seeing it as something that is there for its own benefit. We will put it there by saying, what does defence capability need over time? And then when we take first and second pass decisions to government, built into those cases should be a clear articulation of the skill sets within the industry, the manufacturing and repair capabilities within industry that we need, such that government procurement decisions are informed, as opposed to saying we want this particular piece of equipment and we'll decide down the track whether or not Australian industry has a role. That should be a fundamental part of our decision process as to what we will buy and how we will buy it. One of the critical parts to enable that to work is to overcome the objections of the central agencies when they consider best value for money, which at the moment looks at an off-the-shelf price and compares that to the price of the enterprise here in Australia. That is not an appropriate comparison. If you look at the work of people like Professor Jeroen Roos, it's very clear on a global scale. It's very clear from work on things like the Anzac project, the Collins here in Australia, shipbuilding in the UK, KPMG in Canada have done good work to show that for every dollar that is spent on a defence project, particularly something large like shipbuilding, the taxpayer over a 10-year period gets a substantial return. And so the true value for money comparison has to be done on the 10-year return to the Commonwealth and to our society, all those spillover effects or second-order effects in terms of training, other industry opportunities, improvements in quality. That is the comparison. When you put that together with a defence capability plan that sees industry as one of its fundamental inputs, we then start to get to a place where we will have a procurement plan, a defence capability plan, that will look at sustaining the skill sets that Australia needs, not only to make sure the men and women in our Defence Force have the very best capability, but it also means that we will retain the sovereign capability we need to make the decisions that are in Australia's best interest about our defence equipment and the skills of our defence and industry personnel.